World of Warcraft. A game that has risen and fallen multiple times, created and ruined relationships, permanently infiltrated pop culture, spawned memes, lingo, turned a hermit that rarely bathes, has cockroaches for roommates, and a dead rat as an alarm clock into a millionaire.
The thing is, I used to use a dead rat as an alarm clock, actually, for my stream, because basically what happened was, whenever the sun would come up, it would start cooking the corpse of the rat, and then it would start smelling again, and then the smell would wake me up. So I would use the rat effectively as an alarm clock, and as soon as it, it got hot enough, it would wake me up, and then I would know, oh shit, it's time to stream.
And has stood the test of time more than any other video game in history. Needless to say, it has saved and ruined the lives of many. With it recently hitting its 20-year anniversary, WoW is without a doubt the most influential and profitable game of all time, and it has changed and evolved a lot over the years. Its retail version is night and day when compared to what it was back in 2004, but despite all its success, WoW has had its fair share of winners and absolute stinkers when it comes to its innovation. Hey, but at least it tries new shit, right? But in this video, I'm gonna focus on the worst things Blizzard has ever put into the game. Some of which, in my opinion, did more harm than good to the genre as a whole. Now, some things on this list will be subjective. Others will be objective. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, even if your opinion is f***ing wrong. So let's stop wasting time, do the drop, and die a little bit inside together.
I am Razio.
You're starting off with an absolute huge one here, but we know I always go hard in the paint. So let's talk about the absolute atrocity that was Garrisons in Warlords of Draenor, arguably the worst expansion in World of Warcraft's history. Upon first inspection and reveal, Garrisons seemed like a really cool idea on paper, but little did we know that what we would get was virtually the equivalent of a guy telling you his girl has the hottest ass, when in reality it resembles a trash bag full of wet towels. And I get that Garrisons were trying to combine elements from the original RTS games of Warcraft 1 and 2 and implement them into WoW as some sort of pseudo-player housing, but all it amounted to being was a terribly designed Facebook game that isolated players from one another in a game that is supposed to be all about social interaction. Now, instead of standing in the main city and joining the dungeon queue, you could do it even more alone in your own garrison, which of course looked like everyone else's garrison and had no real features that made it your own unique player housing type thing. Let's not overlook the fact that the upkeep on these things was far worse and far more boring than your normal daily quests that were common in the game at the time. Garrisons were an objective failure when it comes to systems attempted in World of Warcraft, and today they still just sit in the alternate timeline of Draenor, unused and mostly forgotten. The only time you will ever go there in current WoW is if you use the Garrison Hearthstone to get to Draenor faster to do WoD raid transmog runs, and even then you only actually are in your garrison for less than 15 seconds. Let's hope that with the actual player housing coming later this year before the release of the expansion Midnight, that Blizzard learned from their mistakes and it manages to provide a real customizable and immersive and non-isolating version of player housing for the entire player base. For those of you who either weren't around for this or, like me, have deliberately done all you could to bury it deep in your mind, alongside your camping trips with Uncle Dave that always seemed to end up with you waking up with your pants down and the realization he probably wasn't even actually related to you.
That's really fucked up.
Titanforging was another layer of RNG added to the loot system, designed to stretch the gear grind even further.
I feel thin, sort of stretched like butter scraped over too much bread.
It originally started in Mists of Pandaria as Thunderforging, then changed into Titanforging, and then later into Warforging, but it was all the same shit. This system would make it so an item drop would randomly have a chance to roll as Forge, Titan, Thunder, or War, depending on the expansion you were in, and therefore meant that if you got the item that wasn't forged, you did not have the best in slot piece. This meant to be truly BIS, you had to rely on the gods of RNG and pray that you would get the piece you wanted with the level boost of forging you wanted. This got worse and worse as time went on, as Blizzard made it so a forged item could keep proccing additional forge levels, so that even a Titan forged item could Titan forge several more times, and if you didn't get the item that did so, you didn't have the best in slot item. Now, of course, most people didn't give two shits about getting these, but the most hardcore of hardcore and, kids with OCD had to get the best of the best and wouldn't stop playing until they did. The whole thing was a big bag of spoiled ass, in my opinion, and the vast majority of WoW's player base agreed with me. And let's be thankful that Blizzard removed this terrible system, and now the only RNG rolls on gear are for less impactful tertiary stats such as Avoidance and Leech and Indestructible, and nobody really cares about those because, as I said, they aren't that impactful. Even the min-maxers ignore them, so the forging system was a pure dogshit casino-level content extension, and I don't know a single person who misses it. If you've been playing WoW as long as I have, you'll remember when legendary items were just that. Legendary. Legendary meant powerful and hard to get. They were locked behind long grinds, RNG, and difficult content, at least difficult for its time. In Vanilla, we had Thunder Fury and Sulphurus. In Burning Crusade, we had Thoridal and the Warglaives of Azeroth. Wrath had Shadowmourne and Valinir. Cataclysm had Dragonwrath and Fangs of the Father. But then we saw Blizzard do one of the most retarded things ever, and do to legendaries what they did to epics. Make them common, and even worse, no longer the game changers that they used to be. At least not in the way we wanted them to be game changers. They were changed in the expansion Legion to be common and required. This was incredibly stupid and frustrating, as legendaries changed from being gameplay and, build-altering items that also served as status symbols in the game to becoming items that were required for your basic class kit to even function and be viable. If you didn't appease the RNG gods early in the expansion and get the legendary that you needed, your character was trash tier and wouldn't be invited to raid and PvP groups because your character was the equivalent of the biblical punishment for pedophilia to your group.
Damn!
This trend continued in Shadowlands, which, to be fair, at least it wasn't quite as frustrating, as it wasn't tied nearly as much to RNG as it was in Legion. But the fact remains that it was a horrible idea all around to convert WoW's most coveted and impactful item category into nothing more than common. Must-have items that were essentially just another form of borrowed power that everyone knew would be irrelevant come next expansion. Now, thankfully, Blizzard figured this out, mostly from feedback, and have since restored legendary items to be more like they used to be. Granted, the RNG and how you got the quest to start the legendary quest lines in like Dragonflight, for example, was absolute cancer and needs a serious overhaul. At least the items are no longer required for your basic class and rotation to function and be viable. Let's hope that any future legendaries are more akin to their early WoW counterparts in terms of how you go about getting them, like in Vanilla, Burning Crusade, etc.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Speaking of Legion, when the expansion was announced and its preview posted online, the WoW player base was torn over the new feature, Artifact Weapons. And while some aspects of it were cool, I was overwhelmingly opposed to the entire idea, and as I predicted, by the expansion's end, most people agreed with me. Let's set aside for a moment how incredibly lore-breaking and stupid it was to see every Ret Paladin running around with the legendary Ashbringer or shamans running around with a Doomhammer. The artifact weapons served once again as an extra system that did several things to make the game worse overall. Let's list some. Number 1, it provided the illusion of choice that even though the weapons had their own cool talent trees, you would eventually get everything on the tree, and it just served as another way to make you grind your ass off for artifact power in order to put points in as soon as possible into the talents that actually made your class function and viable, restored things to you that used to be baseline in some cases. Number 2, it meant you had the same fucking weapon for 2 years, and Blizzard therefore only had to make a few new models for it every once in a while, instead of making new weapons to find in raids, dungeons, and PvP, etc. 3, it did the same thing Titanforging did, in spreading less content out over longer periods of time in order to get the best in slot inserts for your weapon, and locking the ability to use said inserts behind hundreds of hours of AP grinding. Number 4, it completely hamstrung player agency in what weapon type someone wanted to use. Want to use a two-handed sword as a Blood Death Knight? Too fucking bad. Want to dual-wield two-handed maces as a Fury Warrior? Eat shit. Overall, the artifact weapon system, when announced, was met with all this feedback, and Blizz did the Blizz thing and straight up ignored it and went ahead with this bullshit anyway. And it was to the detriment of the game as a whole, in my opinion. And to add the cherry on top of this giant shit sundae, all the artifact weapons were drained or destroyed in the final raid encounter of the expansion. So now, legendary lore weapons from Warcraft's history have been reduced to nothing more than useless paperweights because they were used as some MacGuffin for a terrible storyline. We can only hope that Blizz stays true to their more recent promise of abandoning borrowed power systems as a whole, and we never experience the like of artifact weapons again.
Oh man. Oh god. Oh man. Oh god.
If you thought we were done talking about terribly made and implemented borrowed power systems and Blizzard's stubbornness in the face of feedback, you're more wrong than an OnlyFans thought that things body count doesn't matter. Enter Azerite armor and the Heart of Azeroth, two things that were introduced in the universally hated WoW expansion, Battle for Azeroth. Blizzard took the shitty, overly grindy system we had with artifact weapons in Legion and doubled down on it in BFA. While being a decently creative idea on paper, I feel like I'm repeating myself, in practice, these shitty MacGuffin combo of Azerite armor and the Heart of Azeroth was piss poor in practice, even compared to the artifact weapon system. The traits on Azerite gear were strong, but they were mostly passive. It didn't change your build or gameplay in any real meaningful way. And let's not forget that the highest tiered traits were locked behind the most egregious Azerite power grind. So you could level up your Heart of Azeroth to even gain access to them. You had to do it. There was nothing quite like getting an awesome best-in-slot gear drop from a raid boss or something, only to find that you couldn't use half the traits on the gear because your piece of shit necklace wasn't leveled high enough. In many cases, by the time you got the Heart of Azeroth high enough to finally unlock the traits, the next raid tier would be out and you'd get another item to replace it that had higher requirements for the same bonuses. And once again, we had another item slot completely unavailable for an entire expansion because it had to be dedicated to that stupid-ass necklace. I mean, at least it was an item slot that wasn't visibly seen on your character like the artifact weapons were, but that doesn't make up for the fact that because of this awful gear system, Blizzard removed what is arguably the most impactful and unique gearing system in the entire genre to make it work. I'm talking, of course, about tier gear. Because your gear now had to have all these boring as shit Azerite passives to unlock, they completely removed tier gear, which alongside trinkets was the main gear system in WoW that actually made gear altering your playstyle and talent selection. I mean, thank heavens that this was eventually reverted in a later expansion and we got our tier gear back. In fact, many people quit the game because of this change, as one of WoW's strongest points was now watered down and just a grind akin to the systems we find in Korean pay-to-win MMOs. This whole system was a huge step in the same wrong direction that the weapons took in Legion, and everyone I know is relieved and ecstatic to dump these piece of shit necklaces directly into their banks as soon as a green necklace dropped off a trash mob in the next expansion. But we aren't done talking about the terrible changes we got in BFA just yet. Next up is another tumor that went right along with the theme this expansion had. The theme of sucking ass from a straw. Now I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly because if you were around during this time, you already know why these systems are so bad. They both boil down to mindless, no skill, easy as fuck systems that serve to be more ways to grind artifact power for your Heart of Azeroth. And the fact is that Blizzard knew it was a failure pretty early on and actually abandoned their initial plans to add several more Warfronts in the game later on. Not to mention the fact that in an expansion that was focused around the war between the Alliance and the Horde, Warfronts had no PvP, and the PvP that was supposed to be and happen in Island expeditions was largely avoided because it wasn't efficient. It's also important to note that it was during this time that we saw the retardation behind how Blizzard evaluated if any piece of content was quote-unquote fun. They saw that, especially in the case of island expeditions, that the amount of players doing them was high, so that must mean it's good content and fun, right? Wrong. We all know how much crap this was. The participation in island expeditions was high because it was the most efficient way to grind the atrociously bad Heart of Azeroth so you could actually use your own fucking gear. It had high usage because it was necessary to attempt to make the grind bearable, not because the content provided any level of real enjoyment. Warfronts and island expeditions were prime examples of ideas that looked good in theory and on paper, but were absolute garbage in execution. Like the Heart of Azeroth and Azerite gear, Warfronts and expeditions were a welcome thing to put in every player's rear view mirror when the expansion finally came to its much needed end. Sticking to the theme of Blizzard ignoring feedback and pushing forward with shit nobody asked for in their hubris, I give you the Covenant system in Shadowlands, the prime diamond of this sort of mentality. This expansion is snuggled nicely within the worst 3 expansions ever released for WoW, those of course being Warlords of Draenor, Battle for Azeroth, and Shadowlands. The Covenant system is a perfect example of a system that had a ton of excitement, potential, and great ideas, but was fumbled because of the developers' inability to listen to what players actually wanted, which resulted in an entire expansion being crippled from day one of its launch. It teased bringing back the amazing class order halls we had back in Legion with this system and allowing players to side with a faction they most identified with and found the most appealing and in line with their tastes, but instead turned out to be nothing more than another borrowed power system that forced players into whatever Covenant was meta for the preferred spec and class that they had. I myself, for example, was a Blood DK, and I've been maining a Blood DK for a long time and was stoked to be a part of the Venthyr Covenant, only to find that I was absolutely crippling myself if I went that direction, instead of going with a different Covenant that I had no interest in. In fact, it was much worse, as the Night Fae faction was best for Blood DK and PvE, but Maldraxxus was best for DKs that do PvP, and I do both. So I had the pleasure of getting to choose how hard I would be fucked in each activity I chose to partake in, and I was definitely not alone in this dilemma. The majority of what was meta was not what the players wanted to pick across all classes and specs, and this is feedback that Blizzard was given time and time again during the alpha and beta phases of the expansion. What should have been a choice of story and purely cosmetic features in the game instead became Sophie's choice, and you had to decide if you wanted to be at a huge disadvantage compared to other players that made the quote-unquote right choice because you picked the Covenant that had the most interest in, or you simply, ate shit and complied to the meta so your character would stay competitive. In addition, with the Covenant abilities going hand in hand with the aforementioned legendary item system that was in Shadowlands, it made game balance an absolute clusterfucking nightmare for the developers. And as a result, WoW was in one of the worst balance states it had ever been in for an entire 2 years. Shadowlands as a whole had the potential to be a great expansion, but the mishandling of the Covenant system, along with other things such as extremely bad storytelling and writing, completely dumpstered the entire expansion right out of the gates, and it was sad to see. Perhaps in the future, when players provide this sort of crucial feedback, Blizz will promptly remove their heads from their anuses and not tie player power to a trash system like Covenants ever again.
Failure! Failure! You're still a failure! Failure! I can smell the failure!
One dangerous pitfall that all MMOs can fall into easily if the developers aren't paying attention, and I've mentioned this in many videos and streams, is the homogenization of their classes, which primarily serves as a way for developers having to do less work on balance. When this happens, it also tries to pull a smokescreen over the eyes of the player base to give them the illusion that they still have choice and hide the fact that the MMO just became less of an RPG where you actually, get to build your character and make meaningful decisions. Mr. Pandaria's talent system did just this. It got rid of the old talent tree system and brought in this road illusion of choice crap that we had to live with for 10 excruciating years. This new talent system did nothing for the game outside of make it more simple and seemed to be made so people with sub 80 IQs could understand how everything works, but somehow still managed to fuck it up and gimp their tunes. This did what we have seen many MMOs do, which is make the vast majority of skills baseline and really only give you 6 to 7 choices to make on your character that were so obviously favoring one talent per row that it became mind-numbingly boring. As a direct result of this, it made leveling even less exciting than it already was, and that's a low bar to hit, as you only got access to new talents in every row every 15 levels. Thank God that this all changed with the expansion Dragonflight, which not only brought back the talent systems of old, but massively improved on it in my opinion. So to any other MMO devs out there, learn from Blizzard's mistakes here and don't do crap like this that homogenizes your game. I guess it could be worse. I mean, you could have an MMO with no talents or attribute points at all, huh? Right?
You are coping and seething. You just can't accept what you're seeing.
Okay, I have 2 major ones coming up next, and I know they will by far be the most controversial and inspire comments in this video that'll try to tell me how wrong I am, but pro tip, I'm right. So eat shit.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
I say this because they are systems that, in my humble opinion, did damage to the genre as a whole and not just to World of Warcraft. But before I get into those 2 major items, I want to mention 2 minor honorable mentions that didn't make the main list, but I still feel were worth mentioning. The first minor one is kind of a joke at this point, as it was added all the way back in Burning Crusade, and to this day practically nobody knows it still exists, let alone uses it. And this is, of course, the in-game voice chat. Now, I can see why Blizzard may have thought this was a good idea to add into the game at the time, but come on, man, read the room. Most MMO players are, to be frank, socially retarded, and it was like pulling teeth to get anyone to even log into your Vent or TeamSpeak server for a raid back in the day. They definitely weren't going to use the in-game client. This feature isn't a knock on Blizzard in any way, but there was really no reason to add this to the game. Anyone who does wish to voice chat with their guild or friends while playing WoW already has access to voice programs, even all the way back in 2007. And programs that I might add were far superior in sound quality. Programs that I might add were far superior to sound quality and ease of use. I'd like to say it's improved a lot since then, but I can't verify or deny it if it has, because I've never really used it, and nor has anyone I've ever known. So in my opinion, this feature just gets a small waste of developer time award. The next runner-up will likely also be highly controversial, and the reason I included it is because I'm sitting on the fence about it myself. This feature was also added all the way back in Burning Crusade, and nearly every MMO afterward has copied it. It's flying mounts. Love them or hate them, this feature absolutely changed the game and the genre. It did many things, including completely changing if, when, and how open world PvP took place, locations you could go to, how quickly you could get to a different area, and of course added a whole slew of new mounts to collect. I am just simply going to ask you guys to answer in the comments down below if you think adding flying mounts to the game was an overall good or bad change for the game and the genre as a whole. As I said, I'm still on the fence. There are a lot of pros and cons, and for me right now, they just kind of balance each other out. Okay, time for the 2 big ones. And I'll bundle them together because just thinking about the damage they have done to the game and the genre overall brings my piss to a boil. These 2 systems systemically crippled the social aspect of the MMORPG. lowered the skill requirements required to progress in the game to levels where all you need to be successful is have a pulse, and generally created an environment that fostered more hostility in the game than it did cooperation. And I'm talking, of course, about the LFG and LFR systems.
What is that? What the fuck is that?
Now, put your pitchforks down and listen up. Let's talk about the LFG system first, as I feel it's slightly less detrimental than LFR. The LFG queue system was added in the game in late Wrath of the Lich King and is the perfect example of sacrificing adventure, social interaction, and actually playing the damn game to the altar of convenience. Now don't get me wrong, I'm all for a system in the game that provides a UI element that allows you to post that you're looking for a group for certain activities. In fact, I'd say it's a requirement, much like how groups are formed now for Mythic Plus, or how it has been in Final Fantasy XIV's Party Finder for a long time. That's right, I shit on Final Fantasy XIV every chance I get, but I'll also give credit where credit's due, alright? It is extremely annoying to have to spam messages that you are looking for a group or need X members for your party in a never-ending sea of messages in a chat channel, and I get that. A group finder element is definitely needed, but having the vast majority of content queuable while you stand in town with your thumb up your ass did nothing to help the game or the genre. In fact, quite the opposite. And considering the fact that every single fucking MMO after World of Warcraft has copy-pasted this system, as it's now seen as a requirement for all theme park MMOs, it just makes me want to take a long nap on some train tracks, man. With the queue system, you have no control over who gets to do the dungeons with you. And let's be honest, a good screening system is necessary because you're always only going to be as successful as the most retarded person in your group. Not to mention the fact that now absolutely zero interaction between players ever needs to take place now that everyone is about as anonymous as it can get. Remember, people, these are MMOs. And the social aspect is what's supposed to separate it from all the other genres out there. You no longer have to meet people in the wild, explore, talk to people, or adventure to the dungeon together. You just stand in a major city, hit a queue button like a mindless drone stuck in line at the DMV. These problems only get further escalated, oh man, when we talk about the abomination that is LFR. This absolutely ass system is a plague on the PvE environment and destroyed the skill requirements, motivation, and exclusivity of raiding. Let me be clear. In the past, pre-LFR, raiding served as a motivational tool for players to aspire to in order to see and play the best content in the game and reap the said rewards. More than any other aspect in the game, raiding also encouraged finding a guild and being social in a social game. People that had no interest in raiding didn't really care that they didn't get to do it back then. I mean, shit, the whole reason I got into raiding is because during vanilla, I saw a Tauren warrior in Orgrimmar in the Might set, and it made me strike up a conversation with him and how he got it. And my reaction was something like this.
Holy shit! Oh, fuck!
He told me all about raiding, and damn, I was determined to become a raider myself. Those were great times, and in my opinion, peak game design for inspiring players to go for more, but then enter LFR in the final raid tier in Cataclysm, and all of that was destroyed. And man, if you are an experienced raider, you learned very quickly why many of these people either never bothered to or weren't allowed to raid in the first place. If you thought the players you encountered in LFG were brain dead, oh man. The amount of retardation I have experienced in LFR makes me want to eat a glass shard sandwich and wash it down with a tall glass of bleach. So many of these people simply half AFK so they can get loot and contribute nothing at all, or it's clear that they, took the face roll meme way too literally and think it's the optimum way to play. Look, all joking aside, I'm not joking when I say that I once invited my good guildmate's 8-year-old kid into my normal raid mode back in Shadowlands for a few bosses that we had on farm, and he looked like a pro MLG player compared to the mouth breathers I've encountered in LFR over the years. I mean, Blizzard themselves had to even add in the determination buff to make every boss 5% easier every single time you wiped on it in LFR, and that's on top of the fact that 70% of the boss's mechanics in LFR have already been stripped away from what they even are on normal mode. That's how bad these players are at the game. And there's no reason for them to improve because LFR exists. LFR, in my opinion, is nothing more than a participation trophy created for the whiny bitch babies that feel entitled to the same rewards and experiences that people who raid normal and above difficulty get, without having to put in any effort at all to improve or get good at the game on their part, all simply because they paid the same box price. That's not how life works. And the fact that Blizzard catered to this mindset, while admittedly not shocking to me, still makes me want to take a drill bit to my temple. I simply just don't do it at all anymore, because no tier set or extra lower item level trinket is worth suffering that you have to endure, you know, during an LFR run. It's just not fucking worth it. If I had my way, both of these systems would completely be done away with and only an LFD UI system would remain. And I know many of you in the comments will defend this cancer, and you're more than welcome to do so, but I simply will do the same thing to those comments that I do to the LFR window. I'll pretend it doesn't exist. Normal difficulty rating isn't even that hard, and anyone with more than a handful of brain cells and just a couple hours a week could easily clear normal mode every tier. My advice is don't defend LFR, and instead,
you need to get good.
Anyway, boys and girls, that is my list of the worst things ever added to World of Warcraft. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree? Did I miss something? Maybe I missed something. There's been a lot of bad shit in World of Warcraft, let's be honest. And there's been a lot of good stuff too. But we have to acknowledge the bad so we know how to make things better. But anyway, guys, your thoughts and opinions down below. Keep in mind, I am still streaming on Twitch and YouTube simultaneously Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Check it out if you're interested. If not, that's cool too. If you like my content and my videos, please like and share it. If you don't, thumbs down and just, you know, I don't know, send me some fucking anthrax in the mail or something. I don't know, get creative. But anyway, guys, I appreciate all the support that I received over the last few months. Take care of yourselves, and as always, my friends, keep it real.